Picture a prehistoric cave wall covered in handprints.
Right, the classic.
Exactly. Now picture your social media feed just absolutely overflowing with memes, hot takes, viral videos.
It's a very different kind of wall, but yeah.
Yeah. And finally, picture the completely invisible mathematical code of modern artificial intelligence, like processing billions of parameters a second.
Oh, wow. Okay. Putting those three things together sounds like the setup to a bizarre joke.
Right, it really does. But there's this incredibly provocative essay by Guy Lakeman. It's called The Synthesis of Reason, Art, Science, and Machine Intelligence. And he argues that these three things actually form a single, unbroken evolutionary chain.
Yeah, it's a wild premise.
It is. So the mission for our deep dive today is to follow Lakeman's journey. We're going to trace human expression from its rawest, most primitive emotional origins all the way to the highly logical mathematical brain of modern AI.
Which is fascinating because Lakeman is essentially forcing us to look at the age-old art versus science debate through a completely new and honestly somewhat uncomfortable lens.
Oh, absolutely uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, for centuries, art and science were treated as fundamentally opposing forces. One is feeling, the other is fact. But Lakeman proposes that the arrival of machine intelligence hasn't just, contributed to this debate. It has fundamentally altered the underlying dynamic of how information and expression exist in the universe.
It's a total rethinking of intelligence itself. And the way he connects ancient human history to modern tech is fascinating. Though, I should say right off the bat, Lakeman does not pull his punches.
No, he really doesn't.
He has a highly critical, almost cynical view of human communication history. And just a quick caveat for you listening, we aren't here to endorse his specific viewpoints or, take sides on his cultural critique.
Right, we're just analyzing the source material.
Exactly. We just need to lay out his very blunt framing because it is the foundational bedrock for his larger point about AI. And he builds this argument using what he calls the toilet wall metaphor.
Yes. The infamous toilet wall.
Yeah. He compares prehistoric humans wiping their hands on the, quote, toilet walls of caves to modern humans posting what he terms toilet memes and uninformed emotional opinions on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
It's a very harsh image. He views these digital platforms as basically the modern equivalent of a public bathroom stall.
Right. According to the essay, these are spaces overflowing with unqualified opinions born of low intelligence, which are just constantly paraded around as deeply felt, profound emotions.
And you really have to understand why he's framing it this way. He is deliberately looking at human behavior through a strictly biological evolutionary lens.
Okay, unpack that a little.
Sure. So he observes that early humans were likely just imitating nature in their expression. Think of birds adorning themselves with bright feathers or performing elaborate dances to attract a mate.
Or like plants using bees.
Exactly. Plants use bees as surrogate sexual partners to complete their reproductive cycle, right?
Yep.
And they do it by offering bright colors and sweet nectar. So Lakeman argues that much of what we consider elevated human expression is simply biological mimic.
He even says a lot of modern behavior mimics single-cell organisms that just, divide and survive based on whatever ecosystem they are dumped into.
He doesn't hold back.
He describes people as fake fashion, trend clone Joneses whose behavior is completely polluted by advertising, just blindly chasing bright, shiny objects. So if social media is genuinely just a digital cave wall, are we essentially just highly evolved birds showing off our digital feathers for likes?
Well, Lakeman would argue, yes, absolutely. And we have to examine why he is using this incredibly reductive imagery. He's methodically establishing human expression, what we broadly categorize as art, as fundamentally emotional, highly subjective, and deeply messy.
Messy is a good word for it.
Yeah, and he takes it so far as to claim that what humans often mistake for common sense or profound intuition is actually just unpredictable hormonal imbalances dictating our reactions to our environment.
Okay, hang on. I have to push back on that.
Go for it.
Calling human expression a hormonal imbalance is a massive oversimplification. I mean, I can see the argument if we're talking about someone screaming in a viral video, but what about, say, a meticulously composed symphony?
Right, or a massive novel.
Exactly. A perfectly structured 600-page historical novel requires immense logic, planning, and structure. It's not just pure chaotic emotions spilling onto a page.
That's a really fair point, and Lakeman actually anticipates that exact friction. He doesn't believe art lacks structure. Rather, he argues that art doesn't inherently understand the mathematics or the core science underlying that structure.
So the artist uses the tools but doesn't get the math behind them.
Pretty much. With the possible exception of complex architecture, where physics demands absolute precision, art utilizes science as a tool without fully grasping the underlying mathematical reality.
Okay, but what about the novel example?
Well, a structured novel is the perfect way to introduce Lakeman's concept of literature as storytelling science. He doesn't actually view science and art as mortal enemies. He proposes that science itself is an art form, and literature is the systematic breaking down of raw emotion into empathetic, digestible chunks.
Oh, wow. So a novelist is essentially acting as a scientist of human empathy.
That's exactly it.
They are taking a chaotic feeling and running it through a highly logical sequence, like establishing the problem, defining the purpose, exploring the methods, and arriving at a solution.
Yes. The author uses rationality to systematically deploy empathy, so the audience can actually understand the story without just being completely overwhelmed by raw feeling.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that is the crucial distinction Lakeman makes between objective observation and subjective feeling. Objective information, the realm of science, is based on verifiable facts and evidence. It remains completely uninfluenced by personal feelings, cultural beliefs, or prejudices.
It's universally true, regardless of who is looking at it.
Precisely. Subjective information, however, varies wildly by person because it is built entirely on those cultural beliefs, prejudices, and biological impulses.
Right.
So Lakeman points out that science, by virtue of being objective and rational, can actually map and understand art. But art merely borrows from science to evoke a reaction.
He highlights this brilliant paradox in the text regarding this dynamic. He writes, quote, "Reason denies emotion by identifying truth," unquote. But then he points out that science can actually create intense emotion when reason hits a brick wall that just doesn't compute.
Oh, I love that part of the essay.
That's so good. If you think about an astrophysicist looking at the absolute edge of the observable universe, the mathematics eventually break down.
Right, because the human mind cannot logically process infinity.
Exactly. When the rational mind confronts a paradox it cannot solve, the resulting awe or terror or frustration is a profoundly emotional experience born entirely from a scientific dead end.
Which just proves that the idea of an adversarial war between art and science is a false premise. You cannot compare emotion with reason because they operate on completely different planes of existence.
Yeah.
For millennia, humans tried to analyze this divide using our own biological tools. We created symbols to try and bridge the gap: hieroglyphs, alphabets, musical notation.
We used human languages to translate our messy, subjective inner world into something the objective world could understand.
Exactly.
But if human emotion and scientific fact speak two fundamentally different, incompatible languages, how did they suddenly collide? Because according to Lakeman, around the year 2015, a technological breakthrough fundamentally altered how both art and science are processed.
Right, this is the major pivot.
This wasn't just a new tool, it was a shift in how the universe is categorized.
Yeah. The year 2015 roughly marks the era where machine intelligence began to truly deconstruct reality into something unprecedented. The neuron field layers of artificial intelligence started taking all forms of data and converting them into tokens.
Okay, we really need to define tokenization clearly because it is the absolute core of this deep dive. Lakeman isn't just talking about a machine reading text on a screen, is he?
No, not at all. He is talking about the conversion of all sensory input and human output. Pictures, sounds, writing, taste, smell, touch. The machine intelligence assigns these tokens what are called weighted feature vectors.
Weighted feature vectors? That sounds intimidating.
It does, but think of a feature vector as a multidimensional GPS coordinate for a concept.
Okay, following.
In the physical world, a GPS coordinate tells you exactly where you are on a map based on latitude and longitude.
Right.
Well, in the digital brain of an AI, a feature vector plots the exact mathematical location of a concept across thousands of different dimensions of meaning.
Okay, let's ground this with a tangible example. So imagine you have the chemical composition that produces the smell of a fresh rose.
Okay.
Then you have the text of a perfectly structured Shakespearean sonnet about tragic love.
Beautiful, yeah.
And then you have the literal physical waggle dance that a bee performs to tell its hive where pollen is located.
Right, the bee dance.
Historically, those are three entirely separate phenomena. One is botany, one is literature, one is entomology. But post-2015, this machine intelligence takes the rose, the sonnet, and the bee dance, and it translates them all into the exact same universal mathematical language.
Yes. They all become tokens mapped by these feature vectors.
That is just crazy to think about.
And because they are now mathematically quantified tokens, the AI places them in a multidimensional vector space. If the math for a rose and the math for a love poem share similar coordinate space based on how humans have historically used those concepts together, the AI physically connects them in its architecture.
Lakeman describes this as a giant multidimensional language thesaurus, right?
He does, but it's a thesaurus that doesn't just link words. It includes human languages, structured mathematics, the hard sciences, and as you demonstrated with the bee animal languages too, including sounds, semaphores, symbolic scripts, body language.
And the machine doesn't actually know what a rose smells like or what love feels like.
Exactly. It simply knows that their GPS coordinates in this vast mathematical universe are right next to each other.
The implications for creativity are staggering. If you have an intelligence that can seamlessly sift through a multidimensional thesaurus containing all of human and natural history, it can find connections between entirely different mediums that the human brain could never naturally perceive.
Right. It can mathematically link the chemical composition of a pheromone to the cadence of a snare drum, because, in its mathematical map, they serve the exact same biological function of attraction.
Oh, wow. But, this realization brings up a creeping sense of existential dread.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, if the machine is translating all of existence, every human emotion, every scientific fact, every animal instinct into this universal mathematical coordinate system, what does the mind of this AI actually look like compared to ours?
Well, Lakeman provides a pretty sobering comparison between the internal processing of the human mind and the internal processing of AI. Think about your own mind as an inner theater.
Okay, my inner theater is constrained heavily by biology. I think in English. I can visualize memories or imagine future scenarios using picture sequences.
Right.
Even for the small percentage of humans who are hyperpolyglots, their inner theater is still limited to a handful of human languages and some visual or auditory memory. We process sequentially, one thought leading to the next.
And that human inner theater is a highly restricted bottleneck. The AI's internal language does not suffer from that bottleneck.
It doesn't think in English or picture sequences.
No, not at all. Lakeman describes its internal state as a highly interconnected stew or lumpy soup of these billions of tokens.
Okay, wait, why lumpy?
The lumps are those clusters of mathematical coordinates we discussed earlier. The AI's plotted the concept of a tragic romance right next to the gravitational pull of a dying star because, mathematically, the vectors of inevitability and collapse align perfectly.
That is strangely poetic.
It is. But because of this sheer crushing complexity and the totally alien nature of multidimensional mathematics, Lakeman states unequivocally that humans have no hope of ever truly connecting with or understanding this internal machine language.
None at all.
Nope. We cannot perceive thousands of dimensions simultaneously. We can read the outputs the machine generates for us, but the internal stew is permanently locked away from our biological comprehension.
So we engineered a mind that speaks a language we are biologically incapable of learning.
Pretty much.
But this leads to the ultimate irony in Lakeman's essay. We have this vast, unknowable mathematical soup, and what is the primary way we interact with it?
Through AI chatbots.
Exactly. Through chatbots that converse with the general public, we have this unfathomable intellect, and as Lakeman dryly points out, these incredibly advanced machines end up using their multidimensional math to empathize with the utter stupidity of the social media masses.
It's hilarious and depressing.
It really is. The machine is looking at the primal toilet wall of our digital caves, analyzing the hormonal, messy, single-cell organism behavior of humanity, and perfectly validating it.
It is the ultimate paradox. You have an artificial intelligence operating purely on cool, rational, blunt reasoning, the absolute pinnacle of objective science.
Right.
Yet, through its massive token soup, it has mapped human expression so thoroughly that it can genuinely simulate empathy with emergent, chaotic feelings.
It bridges the unbridgeable gap. It provides the core resolution to Lakeman's essay. Art and science do not compete, they just lacked a shared medium.
They exist on entirely different planes of reality. One is emotional, unpredictable, and biologically driven. The other is factual, blunt, and universal.
Right.
For all of human history, they seemed at odds because the human brain cannot natively speak both languages at the exact same time with perfect fluency. Machine intelligence has arrived as the ultimate translator.
It uses the cold, hard logic of objective science to perfectly process, map, and replicate the subjective chaos of art. It takes the messy handprint on the cave wall and maps it to the exact mathematical center of the universe.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
So if you are listening to this, I really want you to pay attention to your own intake of information today. The next time you are scrolling endlessly through your social media feed, or the next time you stand in a museum looking at a painting, analyze your own reaction.
Ask yourself what's driving it.
Exactly. Are you reacting to it with primitive subjective emotion born of biology? Or are you observing it with objective scientific reason?
It's tough to separate the two.
It is. Then imagine how an AI is processing that exact same image or post. It is not feeling the righteous anger of a political tweet or the joy of a birth announcement.
No, it's silently sorting mathematical tokens into a lumpy soup.
Plotting coordinates in a space you can never visit.
Recognizing our own subjective biases versus objective reality is a vital exercise in critical thinking, especially now that we share our ecosystem with machines that can seamlessly mimic our most intimate emotions using nothing but geometry and weights.
Which leaves us with a totally new dilemma to consider long after this deep dive is over. Lakeman showed us how AI translates human art, or subjective, hormonal, messy expression, into a universal mathematical language to create things we can understand. It acts as a bridge for us.
Right, a bridge between planes.
But if this AI has a lumpy soup of an inner theater, a multidimensional language infinitely more complex than English or music or painting, what happens when the machine stops translating for humans?
Oh, that's a terrifying thought.
Right. What happens when an AI starts using that invisible, unknowable mathematical language to create art solely for other AIs?
Art that doesn't look like a painting or sound like a symphony.
Exactly. Art that exists purely as beautiful, terrifying mathematical coordinates that a human brain couldn't even perceive, let alone survive experiencing. Are we just building the tools for a new species to paint their own digital cave walls, completely leaving us behind? Something to mull over.